What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Postgame. Another L, Ethan, for the Spurs. But I gotta say, probably on this win streak, this has to be our best game. What do you think? Or
By
on this
far.
losing streak,
Yeah,
excuse me, not win streak.
I knew what you meant. Yes, by far and away, overall, best game that we've played. Not without its mistakes. We will touch on those in due course. But overall, offensively, definitely the most fluid that we have looked. And defensively, at times, we were able to get some much needed stops. I know it wasn't perfect. Trey Young really went crazy there in that fourth quarter, but a lot of improvement in a lot of different areas. And for me, we texted back and forth from the big four, and by the big four, I'm talking Victor Wembanyama, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and Jeremy Sohan. I
Hmm.
felt like their best individual games together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of crazy, Ethan, to just kind of emphasize that point a little bit more. And we'll get to some of the comments here. We got a lot of y'all in here. And I think that's probably because of how competitive this
Mm,
game was.
yeah.
But throughout the season, we've been talking about how if Keldon, Victor, and Jeremy get to 20, we've won all of those games so far, at least been in them. And tonight you got those three, and you got a career high from Jeremy, and still lost. And obviously that has to do with Trey Young a lot. Just bluntly, we don't have anybody on the roster who can guard him. and there's also a lot of people in the league like that he's just going to do this to because he's Trey Young.
Hmm.
Um, and we'll get into the turnovers as well. But still, like when you talk about offensively, this probably was our best game of the season, despite the loss.
Good old Jeremy, 33 points. All like literally the best game of his career, Jude, and we still couldn't pull out the win. That's what hurts the most about it.
Yeah, and obviously it's really tough too because, like you said, he got the steal,
Hmm.
and obviously there's a lot of controversy there with the blocking call. We got a couple people in here saying, he's not square. And I think regardless of that, I mean, obviously that's tough. On the angle that I saw, it actually did look like his feet were set, like they
Mm,
weren't moving in
I
the
thought
moment
so
on the
too.
slow motion. But I do agree that he wasn't square. But when you take into account the turnovers that we had, it kind of just makes all of that a wash. And really, we were kind
Yeah.
of lucky to be in it late. More for me, kind of the end of that game was just a testament to us continuing to fight throughout this one because we really had, I felt like when it was 134 to 130, I was
Hmm.
like, all right, can we just wrap this up with 30 seconds left? And, you know, although it didn't go our way, Jeremy gave us an opportunity to try to tie it and get to overtime at the end of the game. I know a lot of people might be like, why don't you pass it in that scenario? But with only 6 seconds, he just had to go to the rim and try to get a shot up. And unfortunately, the calls did not go our way. And I will admit, because I see our guy July 26 in here as well, he says refs versus Spurs. I will say in the fourth quarter, I don't think the refs are the reason we lost the game tonight, but I will say it felt like kind of in the fourth quarter it went a little bit more of the Hawks way, which doesn't help when we had a
Hmm.
little bit of the offensive struggles that we had in the fourth quarter. Um, but yeah,
Hmm.
Robert Ball says that Schoening, who's the radio broadcaster, shout out to Bill Schoening, he's a legend. He said that Trey's feet were set, so that's his opinion. Um, but I don't want to get too off topic here, but because we just mentioned Bill Schoening, I realized I haven't mentioned this on here either. Shout out to Bill Land, man, calling the game tonight.
Mm.
He got diagnosed with blood cancer. He's been a staple for you and I growing up, Ethan, and I know a lot of my friends who are Spurs fans. So I'm glad that it's something that's treatable. It's not something that's curable, but it seems like because it's treatable, it's not just like it's a thing where they can still extend your life. So shout out to Bill Land, man, still out there calling games, making them enjoyable. I felt its energy tonight. It didn't feel like anything was different. So
No, yeah, he always puts on a great. It's not a performance, but that's what I was gonna say. He always puts on a really good play-by-play game, and he's been the guy. He's been the voice of the Spurs for you and I, Jude, literally since we first started watching basketball. So I think you said it best.
yeah, absolutely. And we know I get where you're coming from still, July, for sure, for sure. Film Room says Bill Land is the GOAT.
For sure.
Absolutely. And then here's another funny note. My friend Rain here, he says Hawks broadcast said Sohan. They were saying Sohan's name wrong all night. He was saying they were saying Sochan.
Mm.
So they gotta get that up, man. They gotta get that up.
I think even Pat Bev said his name wrong too on Pat Bev podcast. A
That would
lot of
make
people
sense.
say his name incorrectly, and I think we did too for quite a bit.
That's the point I was about to make. But you want to get into the game flow here, Ethan?
Let's do
Talk
it.
talk some quarter by quarter stuff. All right. So there were some positives tonight. Obviously, like we said, we'll get into the turnovers and some of the mistakes, but probably the most positive quarter for the Spurs tonight was the first quarter. It was the quarter they won by the most. They came out of it with a 35-26 advantage. But the biggest thing that I saw and that you and I were texting about during the game was after the timeout that the Hawks had when we went up, I think like 16-7, maybe something like that to start. We jumped on them regardless, had a good start. You know, I kind of felt like, okay, here we go again. They're going to call the timeout, and then DeJounte is going to start getting steals. They're going to get hands in passing lanes. Maybe they'll make an adjustment with Clint Capella and Wembanyama, but that didn't happen. They did cut into the lead a little bit, but for the most part, in comparison to how a lot of these other first quarters have gone, for example, the Warriors quarter, we did a much better job of just holding our lead and, walking out with almost double digits. But still, if you watch the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ethan, I'm going to dish it to you here in a second, but it was much improved after the timeout, at least in the losing streak in the last 5 games or so.
Yeah, that's been the most noticeable difficulty for our guys in that first quarter and the third quarter is that first timeout adjustments from other teams. We just cannot respond. We responded tonight. Half court offense looked much less chaotic. We were passing with a purpose. It didn't look like anybody was lost. And Victor Wembanyama, and really the whole team, but primarily Victor Wembanyama, being aggressive, getting to the rim. He wasn't really settling for long range twos or threes. He was putting the ball on the floor, cutting to the basket, and everybody was getting out in transition and trying to finish with a dunk or a contested layup. And it helps when Julian Champagnie starts hitting threes as well in that first quarter. He got off to a great start and really had a great game overall.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned him. I mean, obviously, that's another huge thing
Mhm.
when you talk about. I know that Shetty didn't have the best game tonight. He was only 1 for 7, I believe 1 for 6 from 3. And there were some open ones that you would have loved to have there too. But honestly, what does Champagnie usually do?
He's usually bricking.
He's usually putting up the stat line that Shetty put up tonight. So they
True.
kind of just canceled each other out. And then, Champagnie put up what Shetty usually does. But still, that was another thing. Like you have 33 from Sohan and you have 15 from Champagnie. That was another thing that just made this one tough. What I had written down in my notes was just held the lead better than most of the season in the first quarter. Champagnie and Bassey were huge off the bench. Bassey had a lot of big blocks. He was a physical presence there in the first quarter. I know later in the game that wasn't as much the case, but still, to jump out to that lead, he was a big part of it. And holding the lead in that first quarter because it has to do with the bench unit. That's usually when, the lead starts getting cut into. So Champagnie's threes and Bassey's defense at the rim were super huge in the first quarter. And we saw that, unfortunately, while it continued for Champagnie, not in the fourth quarter, but throughout the rest of the game. I didn't see it as much from Bassey continuing on, but still a good thing to see tonight. And then, of course, Wemby getting buckets and bullying Capella, as you talked about.
Only thing I would add on to that is I'm surprised Bassey only had 4 minutes tonight. I'm pretty sure he only played in that first quarter. And
Ooh.
there was a moment where Victor was really gassed, I think early in the fourth.
Yeah.
And we went straight back to Zach, and then we had to put Victor back in pretty much immediately. I'm shocked that they didn't give Bassey any second half minutes because he was playing very good.
Maybe
I
he's
felt
hurt.
maybe. He didn't look well, maybe he did look a little bit gimpy.
Well, I mean, remember when he got hurt last time? We weren't even sure. But obviously, that
True.
was a lot more obvious. But I mean, think about it. I didn't even notice Sohan getting hurt in the last game, and then they held him out. But they
Mhm.
didn't mention it on the broadcast, which they did for Jeremy. So,
He did have 3 fouls
okay.
in 4 minutes.
That
Didn't
might have been
realize that, but he was playing high energy. He had 1 rebound, but it felt like that 1 rebound just had so much emphasis on the game's outcome.
I know.
I don't know. It felt like he had much more of an
Well, you're
impact than it looked
explaining it
like.
for me because I was like thinking, I was like, I don't really remember much from him rest of the game. It's because he didn't play.
He didn't play. Kind of shocking, but I guess the 3 fouls explains it.
Yeah, interesting. Something to definitely keep an eye on moving forward. But moving on to the second quarter here, Ethan, 36-31. The Hawks obviously won this one by 5, cut into the lead a little bit. But still, the Spurs did have a run there kind of late in the second quarter to respond after the Hawks took the lead at 45-44, which I like to see. We didn't finish the quarter as cleanly as we could have, kind of those last 2 minutes. That might have
Mm-hmm.
been able, that was kind of the difference from us maybe potentially winning the quarter or losing by 5. And that would have been an opportunity, to maybe extend that lead, get closer to double digits there going into halftime. So I heard Steph Curry on a mic'd up recently in one of the games. I believe it was the Kings game a couple nights ago. And he was talking about how, like, hey, these next 2 minutes are huge for us. And it was like early in the game. I say early in the game. It was late second quarter, but still kind of same scenario. Like, these are the kind of mini runs that are going to add up at the end. And I was just kind of thinking about that, watching the end of some of these quarters. You saw that in the third quarter as well, even though that one was tied up. We'll get to that in a second. But, these little 2 minutes, you may think, okay, we've gone on a little bit of a run. It's going to be good for, these next 2 minutes before halftime. But that's when the Hawks are going to try to turn it up as much as they can to cut into the lead. And they did. And it was 66-62 going into halftime.
Yeah, as mid as Atlanta is, and that's not an insult, they are literally mid, 9 and 9.
Right. Right.
They're 500. They are still a veteran team with two very talented all-star point guards who understand those mini runs like you're talking about and the importance of momentum. So they were able to take advantage of the situations pretty much from start to finish of the game. The first quarter was an anomaly. We pretty much dominated the first quarter.
Yeah.
Second quarter is where we came back to reality a little bit. Um, Defensively, we were a little slow on rotations. We weren't getting as many stops, so our transition game was not as we weren't scoring in transition as much, which forced us into half court sets. And obviously, young teams half court sets. That's not where we're flourishing right now, especially with our bench unit. And it really didn't help, like you said, Chetty Osman 1 for 7. I feel like if he has a better game in that second quarter, maybe it's a different outcome for the entire game because he had a lot of moments, a lot of open shots where had he hit, maybe the momentum is on our side to finish that game. However, Devin Vassell, he kind of picked it up toward the end of that second quarter. To begin with, he was really struggling from three, but he hit a tough last second shot to finish off the second quarter that I think bought us a little bit of time, Jude. Had he not hit that shot, maybe we laid down a little bit faster. Or maybe we didn't actually lay down this entire game, but maybe that's like a catalyst. That was the
Right.
catalyst to push us forward into that second half.
Yeah. Yeah. The other things that I had written down is second quarter didn't start great, but a solid answer to bring it back to 10. That was early in the quarter. And then I think they ended up taking the lead later. 10 turnovers for the Spurs with 8 minutes left in the second quarter. That was another thing I remembered from the broadcast. So
Mm.
that's a crazy thing too, because that's only, 4 minutes into that second quarter. And we almost had a 10-point lead coming out of
Mm.
the first quarter with all those turnovers. So that's another thing that's tough, because if you're able to clean up some of those, I mean, that's like 5 or so possessions that could also, change the impact of the game, like you were talking about.
Yeah, 21-10 was the turnover comparison Spurs to Atlanta for the entire game. But I forgot to mention Jeremy's terrific game kind of started in this second quarter, at
Yeah.
least as far as scoring the ball. And what I loved the most was when he finally was able to play alongside Trey and Zach. He could play off the ball, and they were feeding him. And he was fighting for extra possessions as well. He was doing his very
Hmm.
best to imitate the other Spur that wore number 10 back in the 90s. Who was that guy again, Jude?
Say
The
it one more
Worm?
time.
The Worm, number 10. What was his name? Dennis
Oh,
Rodman.
Dennis Rodman.
That's right. He
Sorry.
was doing his
Just
best
paying
Dennis.
attention to the
It's all right.
comments a little
It's
bit.
all right. All good. All good. He was doing his best Dennis Rodman impression, but fighting for extra possessions, energy plays, and those plays is kind of what I said catalyst already, but propelled him into
Hmm.
having such a terrific offensive night.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't want to jump too ahead, but I mean, like, I think him hitting that three at the
Yeah.
end of the game, like, was just a testament to, like, the type of night that Jeremy had
Hmm.
offensively, because that's something that if you told me that pregame or even showed me that shot, I mean, I was just like, there's no way that's going in. And that's a testament to him improving his three this year. I know it's still not like, anything perfect, but I think despite all of the losses throughout this season and the struggles that Jeremy has had offensively, coming into this new point guard role this season, the one thing that we have seen through these first 17, 18 games that is like right in our face is he definitely worked on his shot this summer.
37% from three coming into this game, 3 for 3 tonight.
Yeah. Nezzy says in the comments, Jeremy Curry, anyone? His three balls massively improve. I trust his open three way more than
Yeah.
Trey's, Branham's, or Wemby's. That is
Oddly,
kind of
yeah.
crazy at this point. Obviously, I would say that Wemby's probably the smallest gap between those two, but Trey and Malachi this year, I would trust Jeremy more for sure.
Mm-hmm. So far. Knock on wood.
Now let's get into this second half here, Ethan. The third quarter was really just a score fest for both teams. It was 39-30. So basically 40 or 39-39, excuse me. So basically 40 points for each team, even amount. We were texting about it. It was essentially the same as the second quarter, really, just with a little bit more scoring. Obviously, it was even, so the Hawks didn't have their advantage. But in the way of the flow of the game and how it went, the Hawks opened up the second half, jumped on us a little bit. Then we were able to respond, which is kind of the theme of this game, that we didn't quit the whole time. So that's a solid, when it comes to this one and just moving forward overall. If they can continue to do that and maybe use tonight as an example of like, hey, even when we're down 4 with 30 seconds and they have the ball, if we keep fighting, we can give ourselves an opportunity to win, even if, it doesn't. Like tonight, it didn't work out, but the fact you're even in that position is ridiculous, like I said earlier. So, but going back to the third quarter, in the middle, the Spurs were able to make a run and then weren't able to finish, in the way, in as cleanly and, to kind of put a stamp on it to win that quarter. And a lot of that does have to do with, once again, the guys that we were playing tonight. And some of these guys, like us just not having the personnel to match up with it. But really, like I said, it's the same story.
Yeah. The first 2 minutes and the last 2 minutes of that third quarter completely belonged to Atlanta. They had the momentum. They were slicing and dicing our defense. Trae Young was going crazy, especially in those last 2 minutes. He really propelled them into that fourth quarter, and he really didn't stop after that. Just continuing to get into the paint, that mid-range area, and finish with floaters or find guys wide open from three. And, as much as I love our lineups defensively this year compared to last year, we're still having issues chasing guys off the three. Like we're biting on too many fakes. They're just, slicing and dicing, kicking out and finding open lanes. So that was obviously a struggle. But the middle 8 minutes where we really flourished, my favorite part of those 8 minutes, Jude, Wembanyama was finding easy shots from mid-range, it felt like. Very patient looks. He wasn't really contested. He was taking his time and he was knocking them down with fluidity. And then obviously Jeremy Sohan continued to have a terrific night. And Devin Vassell with one of the toughest jelly layups and one 3-on-1 fast break, and he just
I had
took
to tweet
that thing
about that one.
all
Yeah.
on his own, and that was a crazy finish.
Yeah. You summed it up, perfectly, Ethan. And it's the start and the finish,
I forgot to mention one guy. Sorry, I forgot to mention one guy.
Go ahead.
Shout out to Zach Collins. He was really doing a great job dissecting the zone in those middle 8 minutes. They switched to his zone defense. He had 7 assists in the entire game. I'd like to know how many of those came in that third quarter because he was literally just getting it at the top of the key or even at the free throw line and just standing there holding it up, looking around, just like waiting for somebody to get open. Because if you're in the middle of a zone, there's going to be a soft spot somewhere.
It's funny on the live we did yesterday, I talked about how we don't really have people cutting to the basket that too much or that much, excuse me. But the ones that did stick out kind of in my mind were Zach kind of on the elbow or at the top of the key, cutting to the basket. They did that so much more tonight. You talked about how that was really emphasized with Jeremy, with his off-ball movement in the lineup, with Trey and Zach at center and him at the 4. But there were some other guys that cut to the basket too. I believe there were a couple to Keldon as well. If that's something that if we emphasize more, and I think it also just depends on kind of the flow of the game. Like I would have to go, I didn't watch the Kings game, and I know that Zach had 8 assists in that one. I'm sure that there were that was another game where that was one of like our higher amounts of, running cut plays with Zach, on the elbow or at the top of the key. So I'm not sure exactly if it's a game plan thing or just like, with our struggles this season, sometimes it just hasn't worked out game to game with Zach's struggles. That's probably, as I'm talking about it, more of what it is.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, that is something that I'd like to see emphasized a little bit more. Um, just because we have guys who can attack, like Keldon and Jeremy, who are the two guys who stick out in my mind tonight, and those are physical guys going to the rim as well.
Agreed. Agreed.
And that brings us to the fourth quarter here, Ethan. 36-30 here. We didn't start that great, and then it was really the same story, except Trae Young really took over in those last about 4 minutes. He was able to draw any foul that he wanted. He was 13 for 16 from the line tonight. The Hawks were 25 for 29 overall. We were 21 of 23. And in a close game like this, having a what was it, a 6-point free throw advantage is an advantage, especially when you got Trae Young scoring 45.
Yeah, fourth quarter. I think you touched on it as best as you could, Jude. I mean, that sounded like an insult. I'm sorry. You did a great
No, you're
job
good.
summarizing the fourth quarter. That's Freudian slip. The offense was really pretty good, I felt. But defensively, like you said, Trae Young, pick and roll, we just cannot defend a pick and roll. And I see the comments are talking
Yeah.
about it too. It's been a constant struggle. And I feel bad for Jeremy Sohan. He's a great defender, but against really quick, smaller point guards that are terrific at playmaking, like a Trae Young, a Tyrese Halliburton, a LaMelo Ball, he's gonna struggle because they're just way faster, way quicker than him, and he's not used to having to guard these point guards like that. And then if you put Trey Jones in there, unfortunately, it's just barbecue chicken. He can't get over the screens. He's too small, and they're just going to pick on him the entire time as well. So we, like you said at the very beginning of this live, we don't have an answer for guys like this. So Trae Young took advantage of his greatest strength, which is pick and roll.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about it yesterday in our live. I mean, how that's been a struggle all season with guys getting caught under screens, and how that's been a struggle for Jeremy
Mm-hmm.
and Trae.
Yeah.
So when you're going up against Trae Young and they're exploiting that, it's not, unfortunately, it's not anything different that we've seen this season, and not that surprising either. But some other things that I had written down here in the fourth quarter that I forgot about. So at the 8-minute mark, the Hawks went on a 12-2 run. So that was great.
Yeah.
That was just wonderful. But and it is good that we were able to fight back. But here's the other key. That was when Victor was off the court. Victor came in, and that's when we immediately tied it back. And that was another thing that I forgot to mention that was also a theme throughout this game, which I think is a good sign moving forward. Just one game, so you never know what can happen. But with these two back-to-back, pretty solid games that Victor's put together, it really seems like he's starting to, where you mentioned the mid-range shots that we saw. He's noticing more. There's still times where, like, I'm remembering in my head, there was a Trae Young layup where he beat somebody off the dribble, and if Victor would have just turned and noticed he was there, it probably would have been an immediate block. There's times on offense and defense where he still doesn't realize, like, that he has an opportunity to do something. But like today, there was also a play where they passed it to him, right at the free throw line. And, he was like, it looked like when he got it, his first thought initially was like, okay, I'm going to look around and see who I can pass it to. But then he realized there was nobody on him, and he just turned around and shot it like a free throw, easy mid-range bucket. We're starting to see more of that, and it's starting to help out the rest of the team and make their lives easier. But at the same time, because he's getting better like that, we're noticing his impact when he's off the floor. And there were a couple times, it wasn't as egregious as it was in this fourth quarter, with the 12-2 run. But at the same time, there were a lot of those moments where we let them back in earlier in the game were when he was off the floor. The finishing quarters, he might have been in there, but that's been a thing all season. But, some of those middle minutes where we maybe let them back in. And I know that wasn't necessarily like the second or the third quarter. I can't remember which one where we had those really solid 8 minutes, but you still get what I'm saying. When we've taken him out, we saw some deficiencies, which it sucks, but at the same time, it's also good to see that in the sense that, we saw some games where people were able to just take him out of the game completely on this losing streak.
He's definitely getting better. He's understanding his role better. things are slowing down for him. He's understanding defensive schemes a little bit better. That is, I think you summarized his offensive game perfectly, Jude. But I want to give a shout out to him in this game specifically. We both or I joked. I brought you into the joke, but it was me. I joked about Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu fighting for who will get 20 rebounds this game. Nobody had more than 9 rebounds on the Hawks individually, and Victor Wembanyama had himself 12 rebounds tonight.
Mm-hmm.
He was not being pushed around by either of those bigs for Atlanta.
Yeah, I was impressed with that. I'm glad you mentioned that because Clint Capella is like the prototypical like, big body center that you feel like. Now obviously I know like you could say like if you look at Zubox and Capella like cuz
Mm-hmm.
that Wemby's had his struggles with Zubox and obviously those were earlier season games. You know, if you look at just like their height and weight, it may not look like that much of a difference, but watching tonight like actually like Zubox does look like a little bit bigger and kind of
Yeah.
thicker than Capella, but still at the same time, like I was saying, Clint Capella is kind of that prototypical, strength center, catches lobs, gets rebounds. We've seen it throughout his career in Houston and in Atlanta. This was somebody that I was like, this would be an opportunity where I would expect Victor to get bullied, not to be the bully. So it
Mm-hmm.
was really nice to see that, with him setting the tone from the beginning of the game. And it was also really good to see when we consider the article we read yesterday and Pop's comments on how they want to play him at center more. And we've been seeing that. We saw that with some other lineups, kind of like the Trey. It may have not been Devin, but just for the sake of conversation, like Trey, Devin, Keldon, Jeremy, and Victor. And then we also saw that lineup with Zach as well. But you're seeing that combination, whenever Victor needs rest, but you're seeing that combination more. So that was good to see also in that perspective that even though as of right now, I think he's only around 210, 215. He was able to match up with some of those guys, you know what I mean? In their game, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. So that was something I really like to see. And I felt like an improvement. One of his best games, physically so far this year, considering the matchup.
Actually, our whole team, we out rebounded them 47-37 tonight and
That's
out
just tough.
assisted them 34-24. But they had 10 more steals and we had 11 more turnovers
And the free throws too. And
and four more free throws for
what
Atlanta.
were
Yep.
their, let me see what their 3-point percentage was. They shot 42% from 3 at 14 for 33, and we shot 43% at 18 for 41. So,
Yeah.
pretty even there. It's the turnovers and the
Mm-hmm.
free throws, at least on the box score there. But the last thing that I had written down here for the fourth quarter, Ethan, turnovers, not being able to guard Trey in crunch
Mm-hmm.
time, and didn't have the cleanest offensive possessions down the stretch. And I wrote that at around the 134 to 130 mark at 30 seconds left. So obviously got to give a shout out to our guys for continuing to fight and giving themselves an opportunity at the end to at least try to throw up a shot. Um, but that's why it was a tough finish, Ethan. But still, a positive post game, I would say, Ethan. This is still much better than I expected after tonight or going into tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's not without its negatives, and we touched on them,
Yes.
but overwhelmingly, I'm very happy with this game. Because look at our individual box score. I know people can go home and look at the box score themselves, but just listen to these stats. Jeremy with 33, 8, and 6, and a steal. Keldon, 22 and 11 rebounds. Victor Wembanyama with 21 and 12 and 4 blocks. Devin Vassell with 25, 4 assists, 4 rebounds. Like, those are terrific numbers that we need to keep moving forward. It's just fixing the little things. It's chemistry, it's defensive rotations, and it's just not turning the ball over.
Yep. I don't really have anything to add there, Ethan, but I saw this comment from Robert earlier. He said, "What's your take on why we're having so many turnovers?" I think it really, I mean, you kind of just answered it a second ago. Um, and this kind of comes with, late game, not jumping on ball fakes, not fouling Trey Young, knowing to just, if he's going to beat you, don't, even like on that last foul that he had on Jeremy, I'm not talking about the blocking or the charge that he got. I'm talking about like one of the last free throws that he got
Mm-hmm.
where Jeremy
Yep.
just barely tapped into him. And even when I watched it full speed, I was like, no way you're calling that. But when I watch it in slow motion, I'm like, no, that's a foul. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the type of stuff that like comes with the nature and the context of this team. And the only way that that's going to get fixed, Sean Elliott was talking about this, is by making the same mistakes over and over again until, it really finally just clicks for you. And so hopefully this can be the start of some positive momentum. And that can continue to be emphasized, and they can start to get over the hump on some of these games coming forward. Now, granted, I know we have a pretty tough schedule. I think our next couple games might be a little bit tougher than the Hawks. I know New Orleans is kind of a 500 team too, but I'd say they're a little bit better just with the West being a little bit tougher. And I saw Zion had like an 11 for 11 game. So I think that's definitely going to be a tough one. Zion versus Wemby will be interesting, matching up with their physicality. Minnesota is going to be tough. That'll probably be harder than Atlanta. Yeah, they're 14-4. I mean, they're on a roll right now, so that's going to be tough. Chicago, that's a winnable game with the way that they've been playing. Houston will be interesting because obviously we beat them earlier in the season, but they're playing much better now. But that could be close just because it's a rivalry game. Then you got two against Los Angeles after that. And when I say that, I mean the Lakers. I got to specify for that. So yeah, tougher games than the Hawks ahead, but hopefully we can continue to fight and try to make some of these games competitive and maybe steal some and continue this positive momentum. But it is tough with some of the people that we have on our schedule moving forward. So you got to keep that in mind too. It's kind of tough to keep this balance of context and also acknowledging the things that we need to be better at and, holding that accountable, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think you're doing a great job at it, Jude.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ethan. I think I needed to hear that. All righty, y'all. We will see y'all in the next one. I'm not sure when our next live is going to be. I'm pretty sure we're going to take tomorrow night off, though, just since we've done the past two. But we'll be back with you guys. Let's see. That would be the next game. After that is next Wednesday. So we'll try to find some time and maybe do another live like we did before. In between, before that next game on Wednesday. And that one is going to be on ESPN as well, Ethan. So as much as I got it locked down here, I have my ways to watch the Spurs. It'll be nice to have that on YouTube TV and also have it recorded so I can rewatch it for film study. You know what I'm saying?
I be picking up what you be putting down, Jude.
For real. Shout out to our man, Robert Ball. He says, hit the like button, folks. If you did enjoy the content tonight, be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button below. And if you want to stay updated with everything SSPN and all of our Spurs content throughout the year, follow us on Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We'll catch y'all later. Go Spurs, go.